There's not really a lot to say about Jedi of the Republic Mace Windu for one very simple, very specific reason. All of it, from the story to the artwork to the themes explored in the book, have been taken from somewhere else, and as such the whole thing feels like it could have been, and should have been, so much better. The story was written by Matt Owens, and it's okay, but nothing special. In fact, he didn't really have much work to do because it's mostly a rehash of the original Mace Windu comic, exploring how the Jedi adapt to their new roles as generals in the Grand Army of the Republic, and whether they can, in good conscience, be a part of the war at all. I think it was done in quite a childish way in the new Mace Windu comic compared to the old one, and I think the old one from 2003 just had a better plot surrounding the exploration of these ideals and was a lot more interesting. One positive note is that we get to see Mace as a Padawan, which I thought was pretty cool, and seeing Mace so young showed off his mean streak, the temper we all know he has under the surface but very rarely get to see. It's a shame that seeing Mace so young lasted for all of 12 pages out of the 112 that make up this trade paperback, but I suppose it's better than nothing. Something I didn't understand was the opening of the book, which sees Mace Windu and a hologram of Ki-Adi-Mundi sitting outside the council chambers discussing the events of the Battle of Geonosis and the start of the war. After a page or two, a youngling comes out and informs him the council is ready for him. Mace walks into the chambers and sitting there is another hologram of Ki-Adi-Mundi, and I don't understand why there were two holograms of him, and I don't understand why Mace Windu had to sit outside the council chambers since he's a member of the council himself. We've already seen that when missions come in, a council member can choose to take it if they wish, so I see no reason for him to be excluded from a council meeting and no explanation is given. Neither of these things make sense and are never explained, so I put that down to poor writing. The art is okay. Dennis Cowan drew all the issues except issue 4, which was drawn by Edgar Slazar, but to be honest, there's practically no difference between them, and unless you knew going in that they switched artists for one issue, you would never have guessed. I like the art in some of the places and not in others. Cowan has a style similar to John Romita Jr. in that his art is very boxy. It's less boxy than Romita's, trading off some of that boxiness for a more angular graffiti feel, but in certain scenes, particularly when Cowan draws Prosit Dibs, it reeks of John Romita Jr. Cowan has drawn Prosit Dibs' face in quite a few panels, and when he does, he always draws him the same way. Blindfold on, hair in a long ponytail, and with his head held in a kind of bow. Combine his appearance and his gait with the fact that Cowan draws like a poor man's Romita Jr. and you basically have a knockoff of the art from Daredevil, The Man Without Fear. He hasn't even tried to alter or hide it in any way, it just straight up looks like a copy. I don't think it was intentional and I do believe it's a coincidence, but when you see Dibs drawn in that style, you can't help but think of the image of Matt Murdock all bulked up walking down the streets in his black gear and a bandana because it's so similar. If it had been a DC comic, I wouldn't really have minded, but Daredevil is a Marvel comic. Did nobody notice the similarities? Or did they notice and just not give a shit as usual? Much like Son of Dathomir, the close-ups are good, but the further away a shot is, the more it feels like Cowan just didn't care. In fact, some of his art is just plain sloppy. I can forgive many things in comic art because a lot of it is a matter of taste, and I understand that what one person likes, someone else may not like. However, what I find unforgivable is the amount of sloppiness in the attention to detail. This isn't a matter of taste, it's a matter of the artist not caring. Whether you like your comic art to be photorealistic or quite cartoony, there's absolutely no excuse for Cowan drawing bent lightsaber hilts, or lightsaber hilts that quite simply don't match up from the bottom of the hand to the top of the hand, or just as bad, characters holding their lightsabers by the blade, just like Anakin did on the cover of The Approaching Storm. I don't care if you've never read Star Wars comics before, but if you're going to draw the comics professionally, you have to at least get the basics down. Characters quite simply cannot hold a lightsaber by its blade or their fingers will be cut off. It's that simple. Lightsabers also don't bend in people's hands, and I'm not talking about lightsabers like Dooku's or Asajj Ventress's. I'm talking about poorly drawn lightsabers where the hilt is in a completely different place at the top of the hand compared to where it is at the bottom. They don't line up, and I find such a basic mistake to be unforgivable. Combine the lack of attention to detail with the fact that most characters don't really look like their on-screen counterparts, and the art just feels so lazy. It's a shame because I like Romita Jr.'s art style and I liked Cowan's style here, but it just felt like he didn't care. One saving grace for the art was Guru FX's colouring, which was nice and vibrant, but unfortunately it wasn't enough to save the art. The back of the book contains the standard alternate covers and adverts for other trades Marvel have for sale, and where Son of Dathomir had a lovely little tribute to Darth Maul's appearances in comic covers over the years, Mace Windu gets none of that, which is a shame. I know he hasn't been on as many covers as Maul, but he's been on his fair share of covers. The two I can think of right now are the cover to his one-shot Jedi Mace Windu, which had an excellent cover, and the other being the cover of Volume 1 of the Clone Wars trades. Just like Darth Maul's Son of Dathomir, if you only want to read this comic because you love Mace Windu, or want to see how the Jedi handled their new roles in the Clone Wars, then I would say don't read this. Instead, I'd recommend reading the original Mace Windu comic from 2003, which was simply called Jedi Mace Windu, because it's a much better comic. It had superior art and a sinister tone which suited the story. The new comic felt like an episode of the Clone Wars show, perhaps a two-parter. I could have done with a bit more depth, so I wasn't thrilled with Mace Windu. It was okay, but I think Marvel should stop releasing shitty 4 or 5 issue arcs and focus on telling a proper story with depth so that the plots can be a lot more engaging. Having said that, the original Mace Windu comic was only 48 pages long, and since that comic was so much better and this comic is 5 issues, that's not really a good enough excuse. Maybe Marvel just needs better writers. The title of the new comic implies there will be other Jedi given the same treatment in a line called Jedi of the Republic, but so far I haven't heard of any others being worked on, and the old Jedi comics had 4 other issues, including one that focused on Count Dooku, as well as being part of the Clone Wars comic series, so rather than feeling like a one-off story, it felt like it was part of a larger narrative, but focused on Mace Windu and one particular aspect. So there's not a whole lot going on in Jedi of the Republic Mace Windu that hasn't already been done before and been done better. Personally, I think it's only worth reading if you absolutely must read every piece of canon media released, and if you've already read the original Mace Windu comic, reading this will just seem like a retelling of that story, but not done anywhere near as well. It's not a bad comic by any means, but for people who were reading Star Wars comics before the Clone Wars series was released, Jedi of the Republic Mace Windu will very much feel like Marvel reinventing the wheel.